this is Meredith from the Papercraftery. Today I am sharing how to make some simple quilling paper clover for your St. Patrick's Day crafts and home decor. First thing you're going to need is some 1/8 inch green quilling paper. I'm using Quill Creations Forest Green. Also some sharp scissors, a quilling tool. I chose to use a small slotted tool for this project, but a needle tool worked fine. And 2 types of glue, white glue in a small container with a needle nose dispenser, and also some Aleene's tacky glue. We're going to be molding these later. I think it's a really fun idea to use a quilling mold. This one is by Simply Quilling by Nicole, and also a white charcoal pencil will come in handy later too. First thing you're going to do is take one piece of your quilling paper, and we're going to be cutting this in half lengthwise to make 2 long, skinnier strips. It's not an easy process. It's sort of time consuming, kind of a pain in the butt, but it's easier than having many different types of widths of quilling paper for my use, because I don't use a lot of thinner sheets. You can possibly be able to find a thinner width in this dark green color. If I can find a link, I will put it down below for you. And after you cut those in half, you're going to have 2 long 1/16 inch strips, and we only need about half of those for each part of our clover. So we're going to just kind of cut them, tear them really in half, somewhere around half. You're going to have about an 8-inch strip. Now take one of those 8-inch skinny strips and insert it into your slotted tool, or use your needle quilling tool, and start rolling. Once you reach the end, you're going to remove that coil from your tool. Gently let it open up just a tiny bit in your fingers, and then apply a small amount of your white glue right onto the tail. Close, seal, and pinch into a teardrop. For each clover, you're going to need 6 of these teardrops all together. After you've formed the rest of your teardrops, grab your tacky glue, and you're going to use a little bit to adhere 2 of your teardrops together to make a small heart shape. I find it easiest just to put a little bit of the tacky glue on my wax paper, use a needle tool, use a toothpick, just dab a tiny bit on the edge of one, and then push another one right up against it. It's very easy to use too much tacky glue, and sometimes it's just really tricky to get the excess glue off. So if you use a small tool, like a noodle tool or like a toothpick, you can just apply the smallest amount just to the edge, just enough to have them stick together. Once your clover petals have dried a little bit, you're going to pull out that charcoal pencil I mentioned earlier. This one I'm using is by a brand called Generals. It's a charcoal white pencil number 558. I have had this since art school 10 years ago at least. You can pick it up at any craft supply store in the drawing aisle. Very inexpensive. And I'm using this just to very, very faintly scratch a little white line on the bottom third of your clover petals. If you can picture a clover, it sort of has this very light line that goes towards one side. Just going to add a little bit of detail to make this look a little bit more realistic. Once you have your white detail added to each clover petal, you're going to pick up your tool again that you use for the tacky glue and just apply a very small amount to the edges of these clover petals. And that's what's going to have them stick to each other, so you'll get that classic clover shape. Once your clover has dried just slightly, not completely dry, just enough that the petals are sticking together as you move it around, you're going to use that quilling paper mold I mentioned earlier. We're going to be using the underside to press our clover into one of the indentations. That will create a clover that looks like it's just blooming when it's dry. The petals will stay in a shape that makes it appear that it's just opening up, just for the springtime. After you've done this a few times, you can see that each clover looks a little bit different. Not everyone is opening the same way. Not everyone is blooming the same way. Just makes all the clovers look a little bit more realistic when they're all slightly different. You could stop right here and use these little quilling paper clovers for your St. Patrick's Day cards or for any other springtime craft that you're making. I decided to take this one step further and make little potted quilling clover plants. To do this, I'm going to first put my clovers on a stem. I'm using, this was 18-inch floral wire I got from Joann's. I'm snipping about 4 inches off using a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of hot glue and sticking the cut stem into the glue, letting it sit for a little bit so it dries. And then I'm going to continue doing that for the other clovers that I've made. So now all of my clovers are glued to their stem. Everything is dry. But clovers don't grow out of a pot perfectly straight up and down. So I'm going to take a couple seconds and bend each stem to make them look a little bit more lifelike, like they are actually growing from the pot. Have to do before we put our entire project together is get our flower pot ready. So I'm using a 2-inch terracotta pot I think I got from the Dollar Tree and a little bit of floral foam that I purchased at Joann's. And you can see this is the smallest pack of floral foam I could find, and it's still way too big. So I just cut off a corner with my craft knife, and once I try to fit that in the pot, even that is too big. So I just had to shave a little bit off the end. It doesn't have to be pretty. And that's all you need. Now it's time to plant your clover. Take your pot with your floral foam, and we could just start poking clover into the floral foam and it would work and it would be fine. But it might be kind of ugly to look at if you're looking straight down into it. Let's make it look a little bit more natural. I decided to, instead of using more paper, I'm going to be using a little bit of moss that I had left over from some other projects. And I'm going to take a small amount of this moss, place it right on top of my foam. At the last minute, I decided that I would actually use a little bit of hot glue, just a tiny dab, underneath the moss, just to kind of keep it in place. I was afraid it would sort of rock all over the place. And that ended up being a good idea. And now I can start putting my stems right into the foam. Just one by one, placing them wherever they land. I didn't really have a plan for this part. I just thought I would put them in, move them around, and see how I liked it as I was going. Right about this time is when I realized that these stems were way too long. So I started taking the back out and trimming them down pretty small. I ended up having about 2.5 inch stems, and I actually like that a lot better, so I just kept going. Really like how this turned out. I think it's just so adorable. Perfect for springtime, perfect for a gift. I do think if I made this again, I might use paper instead of the moss. I have a cute way that I make soil from paper spirals, and I'll be happy to link that down below so you can see that post as well. If you have any questions or comment about this quilling paper clover tutorial, please leave them down below. I do have plans to turn a lot of my older posts from the last few years into new videos, so you're going to want to subscribe so you don't miss a thing.